Hi, this is Linda Noss, and this is the third in this Swing programming series. So the last time we met, I asked you to create a program that had a main panel, 3 sub-panels, and then put text boxes or buttons or whatnot on each one of those, and then make it however you wanted to do. So essentially I did the same thing. So I already had 2 panels when I left you. So I just added in a third panel. I call it the blue panel. And I set the dimensions and the color to blue. So that's one thing I did. And then I created a label called greeting, LBL greeting. I set the word, I just said hello in my greeting. And then I just set the foreground color. Just like you can set a background color, you can set a foreground color, which will tell you what the coloring of the lettering will be. So I decided I wanted white lettering, so I set the foreground color to white. And you can also set a font. You can create your own font styles. So I decided to create a new font here. It's Arial, it's bold, and it's size 20. And then I set that new font to the LBL greeting. So my label is going to have white lettering, Arial bold 20. And then what I did was I added that LBL greeting label to my blue panel right here. So you can see that now that should be in there. And then I had to go back and take my blue panel and add it to my main panel. Otherwise it wouldn't show up at all. So when I run this, I get the click me, I get my text box, and I get my white Arial size 20 bold font right there, so you can see what it looks like. So essentially, probably your design looks different than mine, but that's okay because you were just playing around with panels today to see how they work. So the next thing would be is if when I click on the click me button, it grabbed the information out of the text box. Let me bring that up again. So if I click on here, it would grab this information here, and then just instead of saying just hello, it would say hello and whatever the person's name was, a little bit more personal. But how would you go about doing that? So let's go back and look at some other programs that I've written and see how the buttons are used and how the text is used out of the text box. So this is one called push counter, and what it does is it's very simple actually. When you push the button, it adds 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to the counter. It's very exciting actually, and it gets so big. That's all it does, but it does show you some things about how to do buttons. So let's go and look at the code for push counter. Here's my push counter code, and you can see that I have my main program. Let me put a space in there so you can see it a little easier. Here's my main program, and in my main program I created a frame, set exit on close, the frame at the bottom, did the same thing I did with my example program, and then I created a panel, which is much like our main panel. I set the background color to yellow. I created a button, create a button and put push me on the lettering. And then I did this thing here, which you may remember from our applet days way back at the beginning. I think last time we did this was around Christmas time. So essentially, I created a button and I added an action listener so that when I click the button, I can actually program it to do something. And then I took the push button and I added it to the panel, and I added the label to the panel. And so when I do all this, I get, let's see if it's still up here. No, it's the other one. I get, here, let me put this next to this, and you kind of see where the things, so here's my label, and my label actually has in it, down here, pushes : 0. So you can see that when I create my label, where is it? I created my label up here. Now there's a reason I put these things up here above the static void main. I'll talk about that in a minute. But you can see the label, when I created my new label, I put pushes and colon and then count. And count, because it's a variable that I need to use, I created an integer variable called count. Now, why did I put these things up here? Well, if you take a look at my program, you will see that I actually have two pieces to the program. I have my main method, which is right here. And then I created another little class called button listener, which is right here. And what the button listener class does is it creates a button and allows me to tell the computer what to do when I click on the button. So you can see the button listener implements the action listener, which basically the action listener continuously scans the program for some action that's happened. So anything with a listener on the end of it, like button listener, we're going to do temp listener a little bit later on, it basically tells you that the computer's waiting for some kind of action to happen, whether it's a click or a drag, if you're dragging a scroll bar or typing into a text box, it's waiting for some kind of action to happen. And so it's listening. So basically what you can do is you can write these little classes right here that tell the computer what to do if you find that there's an action happening. So in button listener, I have, when the action is performed, add 1 to count, and then reset the text and the label. So that's why every time I click on the button, it executes this code right here. So if I bring that back, you can see when I click on the button, it adds 1 to the counter, and then immediately prints that counter out with the word pushes before it. So pushes 1, 2, 3, 4, so it goes on. Now why does this work with the button? Because when I created this little class right here, and I created my button, here's my button right here. In my button right here, I created the button, and I called it push, and then down here, I tell the computer push.add action listener, new button listener. So when it sees button listener, it goes off and it finds this method down here. And it says, oh, okay, when I click, when there's an action that happens with the push object, which happens to be a button, then go and do whatever the button listener tells me to do. So we're going to take the same idea here, and we're going to actually just grab this, copy it. I'm going to go to first frame, my little program I wrote earlier, and I'm going to add that in there. So now I can go for that. Now, obviously I'm not going to use count, and I probably won't use the label. So let's go back and look at that little push counter one more time. So this is the method for listening. This is my main method. And why did I do this up here? I have two things declared outside of the main method. Now remember, I've taught you that when you have something and you declare it inside of that thing, when that thing no longer exists or is not executing anymore, everything that's declared inside of that disappears. It just goes away. So basically, when I click on the push button, the computer jumps down to this piece of code here. It's no longer in the main method. So when it's down in here, everything that happened in the main method does not exist at that moment in time. But unfortunately, I have to use the count variable and I have to use the label object. So those two things have to be seen in both places. So if I declared these things right here, if I put these declarations inside the main method, then when I go down to the button listener, the computer's not going to recognize them because it's not in the main method. So if I declare these things outside of the main method, then it'll be able to be seen, these two things will be able to be seen all over the program, wherever I am. So I can use those things. Declaring them is a little bit more structured. I call it private because these things, I only want them to see the count and the J label inside the push counter. So those are private. And because the main method is static, I have to use static here. But other than that, declaring them is very much the same. You just say int and count and J label and then whatever you want to say. So essentially, I'm going to use the same idea on my first frame. Since the button is something that I'm going to be using inside of my button listener, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my button declaration and pull it outside of the main method. So where is that? Here it is right here. So I'm going to just grab this here. I'm going to put it up in here. So there it is. It's outside the main method, but now I have to add on private static. So now my button is able to be seen throughout my entire program. Okay. The next thing I have to do is I've got to somehow connect my button to this little method down here. And I do that by adding an action listener on my button. So my button is called push. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to just say push dot add action listener, and then I'm going to have to say what is it going to listen for? It's going to listen for a button listener, and hopefully that'll do it right there. Put a semicolon there and save it. So now what I've done is I've connected the push button from the main method to the button listener. So that is something that was good to do. Okay, now the next thing I need to do is I need to click, when I want to click on the button, what I want the computer to do is I want to get the information out of the text box and print inside the new label, my blue area, hello, whatever the name is they type in. So that means I have to actually make a few more of my objects available to several different places. Because again, I'm going to work with my text box down here and the label, my greeting label. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab my greeting label in my J text field right here. They happen to be right next to each other. That's convenient. So I'm going to grab them both at the same time. I'm going to pull them up to the top of my okay, there they go. And then I'm going to do this, and then I have to do the same thing, private static J text field. And then I have to do the same thing here, private static J label. So there you go. So I've got that all set to go. So now that I've got these three things up here, I can use them in any part of my program I need to use them. So the next time we meet, do this, get all this working on yours, and the next time we meet, I'll show you how to put an action on the text fields and the buttons and the labels. See you later.